From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. Good to be back with you again. Somewhere in Chicago, as we are speaking on this Thursday, December 7th, in a bunch of cramped little law offices somewhere, there are teams of people in business attire sitting across the table from each other, and they're arguing about things like reopener clauses, traditional work, duty availability pay, stuff like that. They're debating scores of labor contracts that cover 300,000 employees of the city of Chicago. In fact, they comprise 90% of all the people who work for the city. So how did this happen, that all these contracts expired all at once? Well, I'm glad you asked. It gives me a chance to give you a history lesson. It was 2007, and our mayor woke up most mornings with a warm smile on his face because he was having a recurring dream. It was that moment when he was flanked by Oprah on one side and a couple of sports legends, and they would ascend that great staircase up to the camera platform next to Buckingham Fountain. There were hundreds of the world's celebrity anchors up there, from the Today Show and Good Morning America, Fox and Friends, CNN, BBC, maybe Good Morning Budapest. And the mayor would greet each one saying, "It's a wonderful day and welcome to Chicago." And later that day, he'd help light the Olympic flame in Washington Park. And all around the world, mommies and daddies would be saying, "Hey, next year we got to go take the kids to Chicago. It looks so amazing, that beautiful skyline." And all the revenues would come to Chicago, make it fat and rich for decades. But the one thing that did worry the mayor on that morning was a bunch of striking firefighters or garbage collectors, ruining the shot with picket signs behind him. So he set out to write 10-year contracts with just about everybody. So the police officers, they'd be smiling as they welcomed the world's athletes out of the high-speed rail terminal under Block 37 and showed them the way to the Olympic Village. You know the whole story. So did it work? Well, what residuals do we have today from the 2016 Olympics in Chicago? We got one. We've got those labor contracts. And as we'll hear today, they've got some expensive provisions in them that might take years to climb out from under. But somebody's on it. He's Chicago's Inspector General, and he's published a report on these contracts, big report, and how the taxpayers are having to pay for this little thing over the next decade. He has a few suggestions for how to reduce some of those costs, and I am very honored, I'm privileged to have Inspector General Joe Ferguson sitting at the table with us today. It's great to see you. Thank you for being here. A little bit of a long, gassy introduction, but I just can't resist. I can't resist talking about the Olympics and all the great things that the Olympics did for Chicago. May I take a moment, though, to actually say that, I want to talk about all of that stuff, but in the ensuing hours since we got started with the show here today, a lot of breaking news is happening. I mean, we're seeing things that are kind of related to one another. Another Inspector General, not you, the one at CPS, has made a decision that he's recommending that Forrest Claypool be fired. And meanwhile, at the Capitol, probably as we're speaking right this moment, it looks like Al Franken is probably facing the cameras and telling the world if he's going to leave the Senate. We don't know what he's saying or what he will say. And it makes me think about due process, which is something that you deal with very expertly every single day. And I just kind of wanted to see if you could help me draw some through line here. Forrest Claypool did some bad things as far as we can tell, and it looks like he had a thorough investigation from his IG, and his IG has made a recommendation. So maybe the board will take this up, maybe they won't. The mayor says he doesn't want it, but nevertheless, there's something that feels to me like due process there. Al Franken and all the others in the Senate and the House are not beneficiaries of due process. They're just beneficiaries of public opinion. Talk to me about that, would you?
So both of them are occurring in obviously a political and highly politicized environment, right? I agree with you on the Al Franken one. I don't know how Congress works. I'm just a citizen and a newsreader like you. And it looks like politics are predominating, institutional politics, actual politics are sort of predominating the drive towards pushing him out and drawing judgment. And there is a process that exists in Congress through the Ethics Committee to actually investigate and get to the fine points. As this particular controversy has rolled on, there's been a succession of people with additional allegations, which he's denied as compared to the first one. It's a complex situation. You're exactly right. There is a system that does not seem to be applied there, that seems to be almost overridden by public sentiment, the court of public opinion, if you will, and real politics. Here, complex situation, two very dedicated career public servants on the opposite side of an issue that touches upon ethics. And the most important thing here is thorough inquiry, conducted independently, with formal issuing of report and findings to a body that is responsible and accountable for making a decision, that is in some significant part transparent in that it's playing out in the public domain. I don't think we could ask for anything more than that, regardless of the outcome. And it's the place that we want to be to avoid being in that sort of snap judgment, quick decision sort of situation when the underlying facts are very complicated.
I mean, it's almost sort of King Arthur-ish or something, but the idea is that we've evolved from a species that doesn't mete out justice by using pitchforks and hammers and torches. We sit down around the table and we discuss it, and we apply justice in some way or another.
Our higher selves, that is what we endeavor to do. Our aspirational selves, that's what we endeavor to do. But I don't know who said it, but humankind is in a race with itself and its lower impulses. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's a lot of this moment is there's a lot of kind of primal kind of energy that's going on out there, and that's what's driving decision-making and issues. Yeah.
And none of this should be interpreted in any way as being critical of the, the Me Too movement or anything. I mean, it's a radical and I think refreshing kind of impulse.
So I can't remember where I read it, but recently somebody very much sort of aligned with the Me Too movement, the hashtag Me Too, pointed out that believing women does not require and should not involve suspending inquiry into the facts. And that's where the due process comes into play, is the real digging into the facts, because these are very complex matters of themselves, factually and evidentially, and they're human affairs, which are always complicated.
Right. And on a day like today, it can be very difficult to be standing on the side watching this raging river going by and saying, but what about due process? Nobody wants to hear it. So that's the background that we're in today. And again, just one more diversion from this. I'm really curious about how a guy decides that he wants to be an inspector general. I mean, it just seems to me like exactly what we're talking about. You're the guy who has to stand there while everything's on fire and say, have you considered these 25 facts and the conclusion that these 25 facts come to? I mean, there's this legend about Paul Ryan, that when he was 11 years old, he was dreaming of cutting Social Security, and he finally got his dream. Is it like that for you? Were you 11 years old and thinking, I want to be an inspector general?
No, but what I did want to be was a lawyer working for the public good. And so I spent 15 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office, both in the civil and the criminal side, prosecuting all sorts of different matters. And I worked with federal inspector generals in that context, and sort of came to learn what that relatively new innovation in government, because it really only dates to the 1970s, is really all about. And had many experiences as a prosecutor. In order to make a good case, investigation and prosecution, you have to understand some of the context in which the misconduct, the fraud occurred. And what you find out is that there may be flaws in the systems and the programs themselves that enabled that. Your job as an investigator or prosecutor is to eyes on the prize, focus on the bad actor, and recover the money. But you know this other stuff. And you can bring it to the attention of the department if it's a government program in which it occurred, but they have no obligation to actually do anything about it. It's exactly that sort of situation that the Inspector General model evolved from, which says, look, there's two functions that should work together in synchronicity with each other. One is the investigative function, and investigators specialized skill set, prosecutors specialized skill set. They're not good at program management, right? They're not good at data analysis generally. And so the things that they find that speak to program issues, they give them to auditors, performance analysts who actually are trained in these different, with these different tools and these different skill sets to look at what may be at fault with the system, whether it's inadequate policies, poorly implemented policies, poor controls, whatever. On that side of the ledger, they're doing government program performance audits, and they may from time to time find outliers and red flags that are indicators of individual misconduct. Under the same roof, the Inspector General's roof, you hand that information off to the investigators because auditors don't collect and analyze and report out information in a way that's suitable for admission into a contested legal proceeding. Those things come together. I had the experience as an investigator and prosecutor, and so often saw, and there are very few cases ever that are so big that actually affect a change in how we do business. So that opportunity for the bigger fix was something that, you know, when I saw the opportunity here in Chicago, it kind of called to me, given the point that I was in my career. But why does somebody do this? It's sort of a combination of maybe faulty genetic switches and some degree of socialization. And for me, it was a little bit of a midlife crisis, and I couldn't afford a red sports car.
But I mean, what comes with the job is that you have to have a thick enough skin that some large portion of the public basically hates you for what you're doing. I mean, you're constantly making trouble for people.
The way, and this dates to my days as a prosecutor, you're not making trouble for people. To some extent, if you're talking about wrongdoing, they've made trouble for themselves, and it's the public interest, the greater interest, the greater good that needs to be your focus on things, which doesn't mean that you suspend your awareness and your consideration of the human element and all sorts of things. People make mistakes. That's a lot of what we look at are just simply mistakes. So, yeah, people are mad, but quite often with a lot of this stuff, what they're mad about is really things that they initiated themselves and the consequences of it.
So the way this works is that you can just call up somebody and say, hi, I'm the Inspector General and I have a complaint about you and I'd like to have you come to the office for an interview and we're going to start investigating what you may or may not have done. You have that power.
It's somewhat. It's a little more complex than that. First of all, it's not me. It's an extraordinary staff of now nearly 100 people.
I was using the
the
office.
editorial,
Yeah.
What you just described is pretty much the last step in the process. Where we actually talk to the subject, somebody from whom we've developed a significant amount of evidence that all points to actual wrongdoing. Where we start is the public, a complaint from the public or from coworkers or from something that we read in the media coming into our website, chicagoinspectorgeneral.org, or to our hotline. And providing us with information, which we then follow up on with the complainant, and we go from there. But the general answer to your question is, yeah.
Yeah, the general answer is yeah. You know, for folks like myself and the cadre of people who, you know, might watch a show like this, some great armchair reading is your quarterly reports. I know that sounds ridiculous, but they are so fascinating to me because they really are a kind of a compendium of misdeeds, large and small, writ large and small, committed by all of our public servants. And at the one time, on the one side, it feels a little bit, you know, it feels tawdry to be reading all these things. But on the other, I find it to be kind of a, there's some good news in there, that it's not quite as malicious as many people might think government is. I was consuming your Q3 report, the 27 Q3, which came out a few months ago, and in it, on the large side, we have the Department of Water Management with just rampant corruption of all different kinds that you uncovered, and we should talk about that. But I was fascinated with the smallest stuff. There's a guy who is a booter for the city of Chicago. I mean, you may not even remember this, but he was caught. I think he took $50 or something from a motorist not to boot his car, and that ended up with him losing his job. And he must have had that moment when the Inspector General's office called and said, "We'd like to come to talk to you about this incident." Would you talk to me about the lowest level of graft and corruption, and whether you think we're getting better in that?
So a few things. That lower grade stuff, and frankly, someone who's soliciting money in return for some sort of public act or non-act, that's pretty serious from our perspective, even if it's a small amount of money. And if you think about it, that has a resonating effect of the impressions of the citizenry.
It sure does.
On what their government is really about. And government is not held in high regard right now. That's an understatement of gross dimensions. And each of these smaller acts is something that just perpetuates that perception of government that actually isn't for the people, right? So it's important at that level, but it's also the small stuff here. If we didn't pay attention to it, we're basically sort of seeding the ground to that and and just shift gears just a little bit. We're a little bit challenged culturally in our city in that we seem at some level in love with our narrative of corruption. It's part of our history.
It is.
And there are colorful
This is
characters
Chicago.
and colorful incidents.
Yeah.
And we're in love with it, and we perpetuate that narrative. And these things actually kind of feed the continuation of that perception. So it's important. But you noted, not everything is malicious. And if you read the reports closely, it's not all bad stuff. There's actually good news in there. And there's a general good news that is really frustrating for everyone that works in our office. Yes, somebody who's a bad actor removed, that is a bad thing, and we've done a good thing. But the way that we see things, and we wish the media would see things, and therefore the public would see things, is this government cares enough to have a vigorous, protected, independent oversight body that is looking for the bad actors, that is looking to recover the money, that is looking for ways to improve. And in fact, through our work, government is getting better. And quite often, for us, the issue isn't what we found that was bad. The issue is whether or not the leaders actually respond to what we found was bad. It's what they do about that information. They can't be held accountable for what really is the human element in play in this massive, complex organization. And so as long as there's responsiveness, I say things are getting better. And that's the good story. That's the good news in all of this.
When I was a much younger man, a long time ago, I did a lot of construction work and that sort of thing. And at one particular time, I was working on a project in Uptown where there'd been a fire in some big multi-unit building, and we were in there stripping it all out and everything. And I just casually said to somebody at one point, it's really interesting that we've been on this job for 3 weeks and we haven't seen anybody from the city out here at all. Nobody's come around to see what we're doing, and it was just very casually said, the inspector comes around every once in a while, collects his $20 or $50, and that's it. So we're cool. We can keep working here, and that kind of experience is something that many people I know have had, and particularly then, this would have been the 70s. It really was. It felt to me like it was more a part of the DNA of the city then than I think it is now. And I don't know if it's just because I'm older and more established, and I just don't want to believe that kind of avarice is there. But that's kind of one of the questions I wanted to ask you today. Do you believe that we've made strides in that kind of low to middle level corruption?
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
We have cared enough to create and empower offices like mine to go after this stuff. The city has cared enough to be responsive to the sorts of audits that we've done that identify control issues and structural issues, and that create the spaces in which exactly that sort of conduct could proliferate in the past.
Yeah.
We're sort of building the accountability mechanisms, the capacity to identify those outliers of behavior. You say, there's a significant job site where there has been no one from the city out there. Well, that sort of thing actually should reside now in data, in a database somewhere in the city. And that's why our office, over the last few years, one of its has focused a lot of attention on identifying all of the data that the city collects and creating a data analytics unit to identify those outliers.
Right.
Not simply for our office to find bad actors, but to identify those red flags that allow the departments themselves, the contract managers, the program managers, to say, hey, what's going on over here?
Yeah.
And that's the ideal world that we want to get to.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, as our viewers may know, I've often said that for a while I also ended up working for the city, and I was around at the city when they started putting the GPS trackers on the garbage trucks and snowplows and stuff. And that was amazing to see. I mean, when they first went in, I don't think I'm spilling anything here, that the people in Streets and Sand could clearly see that there were plows that were not supposed to be where they were supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I wasn't around long enough to see how that all got cleaned up, but I can't imagine that with the technology that we have today, I mean, every meter reader is walking around with a handheld device. Every inspector has something. So it would be much more difficult to just say, yeah, give me $50 and I'll walk away, because you gotta somehow or other falsify the data in the machine too. So a lot of things have changed.
So they have, and you've identified GPS as a key thing. These trackers, sometimes they tell a story in and of themselves.
Yes, they do.
And so what we're much better at is identifying the illegal behavior, but it's against a backdrop where a lot of things in the city and in the state, and to a lesser degree in the country, the public looks at and says, that's not right, that's not ethical, it is perfectly legal. And so to change the perception of the ethical standards and the morality and the focus and the objectives of government actors, elected officials, in this system where a lot of stuff that just looks like conflict of interest, that just looks like it's corrupt, is still legal, that makes it really hard to change the perceptions.
Yeah. And I can't let it go what you said earlier. I think it's such an important point that it just sparked the sometimes mirage thing, right? I mean, here's for you younger folks, they set up a bar and then they just invited everybody to come in, and bagmen coming in every single day, and they were taking bribes. It exposed what we already sort of knew was going on. But you're absolutely right, though, that there was also, and there is lingering to this day, a kind of that's us, all right. They couldn't do this in Cleveland. We're so much better at this kind of clout and greed and boodle. But anyway, that's just, you're right, it's in our DNA.
Though I'll tell you, I didn't grow up in Chicago, I grew up in Boston.
Yeah.
Old machine-based Northeast cities, the same sort of thing everywhere. We in Chicago, and I've been here for far more than half my life now, and I'm no longer a young man, we love our narrative and in ways that other cities don't love that narrative, and that's a distinguishing factor.
And it must, and you have to deal with that all the time. It's like, well, it was only $20 or something like that, right? Okay, look. We're off the topic here. We were going to talk about this, your report on collective bargaining agreements. Should we get serious about this for a few minutes? Would you be willing? You put a report out on May 17th about what we talked about at the top of the show, that almost 90% of Chicago's employees are in some kind of a collective bargaining agreement, and they're trying to hammer them all out right now. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard. I don't know where to begin, but I read the report and I just got completely drawn into it. Can we just do random stuff? I don't know. Maybe we'll tie it together by just doing a bunch of individual things. You found 200 motor truck drivers that you said weren't needed at a cost of like $20 million a year because they're union drivers who are supposed to be driving vehicles that ordinary folks can't drive, right? Now, I don't want to pick on them, but it's just a good place to start.
Yeah, so I like telling that story. So I'm glad you started there. It's not just that they're driving vehicles that other people can't drive. They're driving regular vehicles that other people can drive, and that's really where the essence of the savings identification came into play. There is a concept called traditional work that is embedded in each one of these trades contracts. And to step back,
that's something I really want to. My goal is to leave here today understanding what traditional work is, if you can explain it.
So each contract representing a certain type of worker with certain types of positions in the city, and to some degree a certain expertise. The workers doing that work are governed by this contract, represented by the union, and traditional work says only these workers represented by this union can do that work. So in the context of the motor truck drivers, and I'm with you, we don't want to pick on the Teamsters, but it's a low-hanging fruit situation. The scenario that we came across was pickup truck, city driver, a Teamster, sitting in the truck and reading the newspaper while a painter is painting a curb yellow, fire hydrant red, freshening up the paint. And we all see things like that every day. And what we see is a worker loafing, right? We looked into it. We get complaints about that all the time. You know, you look at a crew standing around a hole in the city, and there's one guy working and everybody watching. And what we found was that motor truck driver, that driver was doing exactly what he was supposed to do. He's not allowed to get out of the truck and help the painter. The painter's not allowed to drive himself to the work site. It's enshrined in the contract in the notion of traditional work. Only members of the painters union can paint. Only members of the Teamsters can do the driving. And we did a very, we identified positions where no one could really argue and made a point of comparison of how unionized private sector contractors doing the same work for the city, because the city, the overflow, the city uses private contractors, staffed the very similar functions. And that's where we saw, an electrician, a painter could drive himself to a site and then do the work, right? And back to the Olympics, so there, the simple, indisputable ones, 200 motor truck drivers that the city doesn't need to employ at a cost now of over $100,000 a year. Each, meaning $20 to $25 million a year, a 10-year contract. Now you're talking $250 million. And that Olympics, the 10-year contracts, we said that they exist nowhere else. They shouldn't exist. It should be 4-year cycles. The example that I like to give is at the point in time that contract, all 37 of those trades contracts were approved by the City Council as ordinances in December of 2007. iPhones didn't exist. And so if you think about how much the world has changed, how much technology has changed, how much the way that we deliver services has changed over the course of 10 years, it's extraordinary. We've tied our hands managerially to be able to innovate in the ways that allow us to deliver more for less.
Very interesting point. I'm looking at another one of these terms that I've known since I was a teenager, prevailing wage. That's another issue that you've looked into, and you think that it might be time to try to see if there's a way to retire that.
So you get really into sort of the technical weeds on
Yeah,
that very
this does get
quickly.
technical,
But I think there's a general point to be made. We recently issued a report on the city's enforcement of the base wage ordinance. Right, we have minimum wage, base wage, prevailing wage. And what tends to happen with legislation, all of it well-intentioned, sometimes kind of copycat and sort of quickly thrown into the city mix, all of it well-intentioned with ostensibly good policy and social policy objectives, is they're passed in an iterative, sort of cumulative fashion. And what they all amount to and what their effects are on our budget, what their effects are on our competitive positioning, there is no holistic examination of what they all amount to. Everything just sort of toodles along in its own lane. And that sort of broader programmatic, holistic examination of what we've created by this and then this and then this and then this is something that really is critically important. We're in the fix that we are with our union contracts because simply an accretion of giveaways over time. Why? Because each round of negotiations starts from the existing contract and then we go from there. And it's costly to claw all this stuff back. But, and we talk about how much it will cost us to claw something back, but we never talk about the cost of the consequences of what we've created. And that's what we've tried to do with this report.
So prevailing wage.
So prevailing wage, I'll be perfectly candid. It's a level of complexity that I'm not even expert at going into.
You'd have to be a labor attorney, an experienced labor attorney, to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
But basically, it means that people who are tradespersons, electricians, bricklayers, plumbers, that kind of thing, end up being paid more working for the city than they would if they were working for a private contractor for all sorts of arcane reasons. But that you're saying maybe it's time that we tried to level that a little bit.
So that exactly right, and thank you for putting it in simple terms because I would have gone into the weeds on it very quickly. But there's a broader issue with how we manage our labor contracts and our labor relations that I puzzle over. It looks to me like our public sector unions conduct themselves in ways that private sector unions conduct themselves in this regard. The pot of money that's available in the private sector, those are profits, and the objective is to get as much for the workers, your union members, as you can, the greatest amount of profit, otherwise profit taking of the corporation. We do a similar thing in the public sector. What seems to be missing is the public good, the public interest, because those aren't profits. That's taxpayer money.
Yeah.
And so that we want more, if you want something from us, you pay for it. What's missing is actually the fiduciary duty that's written into the city's ethics ordinance that every worker has to the public. That's not reflected in the outcomes of our collective bargaining agreements. It's just simply profit-taking behavior with taxpayer money. And there needs to be some leavening of the public's interests, one, and some leavening of the notion that wherever the contract lands, it should reflect the morality of the city, it should reflect good public policy, and it should be sustainable. And that is sort of the big generational shift that we need to affect in this moment.
And as you say, part of what's difficult about this is untying this Gordian knot that has been tied over not years but generations, because we keep stepping things up. And I know one of the things that we've talked about on this program, because we talk a lot about CTU and teachers and that kind of thing, is that there's been a big hullabaloo about the pension, the amount of money that we pay for teachers' pensions. And it's pointed out by the union, and I think with great authenticity, that at times in the past when the city had no money and couldn't give the teachers a raise, and they desperately didn't want to trigger a strike, this was what they were able to put on the table. Okay, how about we pick up 2 points of your pension?
Yeah.
And that would have been a good solution if it had a sunset on it.
Right.
But it didn't. And now we're hundreds of millions of dollars into that. And how do you, as you say, how do you claw that back? It's now, if you come into teaching today and you're 24 years old, that's just part of the legacy. It's, how are you going to take that away from somebody, right?
So it's incredibly complicated, but it's a reflection of the transactional way that negotiations are conducted in each bargaining round. And the job of the people on the government side is to not completely go into that transactional mode and to hold in mind sort of the greater public interest. And in all of this, go back to the motor truck driver situation. So we have pension issues in the city with respect to the 4 main pensions, for which we'll have complications in the future. But so we've identified $20 million a year that could be saved, right? Make the union a partner in this and say, all right, we are going to dedicate half of those savings to the pension fund, so that you're assured that our motives here are actually for your good as well and the good of your members as well. It's that sort of making a partner of the unions that we really need to be looking for in those opportunities. A similar perspective applied across the board. Some of that, unfortunately, we don't get to because we're not transparent enough with each other on the opposite sides of the negotiating table. You want to make the teachers' union a partner? Open the books. Make them accountable for their own role in the complicated financial situation that we're in some respect. But we're arguing past each other rather than looking for the ways to actually work with each other.
Now, oh, and by the way, for those of you listening on the podcast, our guest today is Joe Ferguson. He's the IG, the Inspector General for the City of Chicago. You were appointed way back in 2009, I believe, right? Was that correct?
Correct, November of 2009.
Mayor Daley then appointed you.
Yeah.
And then you were reappointed in 13 and 17 by Mayor Emanuel.
Correct.
And in, let me see, I think it was April of this year, you took on expanded responsibilities with the police department. So you're now the IG for police. That's correct?
There is now a dedicated unit within our office of about 20 people, full-time, all the time, 24/7, looking at the operations of the police department.
So that expands our conversation a lot, and we should go into that. But I don't quite want to leave this thing about collective bargaining yet, because we haven't talked about police and fire, which are the biggest parts of this. And as I said, and we'll say again, we're not picking on the Teamsters by talking about MTDs, because wow, I mean, look at some of the things in the fire department. Whatever duty availability pay is, that alone, you identify about $56 million that we spend of taxpayer dollars for whatever that is, and I still don't completely understand what it is.
At its core, it basically sort of recognizes that a fireman could be called to duty on an emergency basis if there's some significant emergency at any time, and so there's this added kicker for that fact. Well, there's a question as to why this exists as an added kicker when it's a fundamental component of what you're signing up for in the fire department. Why do we have this separate payout as opposed to having it sort of embedded in the wages? Somebody could respond to that and say, well, the salaries that you pay are the basis for the calculation of the pension, and by having this kicker over there, it doesn't feed into having to pay more in the pension. It becomes very complex, but all of these very complex documents with all of these sort of special emoluments and benefits, the public doesn't understand. The city council historically has not understood, and
I think that's critical.
And one of the critical things here is inspectors general typically their primary customer is the legislative branch, engaging in active legislative oversight, and the collective bargaining agreement report was a moment where a lot of eyes were opened in the city council, because here was this readily consumable product that allowed them to say, hey, wait a second, what's going on here?
Yeah, you know, actually, I strongly urge you to Google this thing. It's just available. Just ask for the Inspector General 27, the Collective Bargaining Agreement Report from the Inspector General's office, Joe Ferguson, City of Chicago. It's very easy to get. It'll just pop right up on your screen. And I think you, like me, will end up sitting there spending about 45 minutes just reading this and going, I didn't know that. And even if you think you do know these things, and I'll bet you 36 of the aldermen will have the same reaction that I had, that they had no idea that we're paying this much for uniform arrangements and all the rest of these kind of, comp time. I mean, comp time, now there's a snake pit.
Mm-hmm. And we, at the time of our report, there was about a $250 million sort of reserve obligation that the city had for comp time payouts, because in a number of these union contracts, the city is not in a position to limit the accretion or the accumulation of comp time. And so it just builds and builds and builds. And it doesn't get paid out on the basis of what your salary or wage was at the moment that you earned it. It gets paid out on the basis of the salary or wage that you're collecting when it gets paid out.
30 years later.
30 years later, exactly right.
Right. So when your hourly wage was $25, now it's $85. That makes a huge difference.
And there's some sort of inequities and imbalances in all of that. For many city workers, there's a limit. First of all, comp time needs to be approved and justified by the program managers and the department heads, and there's a limit on how much can accrue. In the police realm, there is no limit, and there really is no check on what it is that we're actually doing there. You mentioned the city council. It wasn't just the collective bargaining agreement report. It was the CPD overtime report, where the scales fell off of the eyes, and it's like, wait a minute, what is going on here?
Which I guess, just for clarity's sake, this was a different report that you did recently. It was just a few months ago, a couple months ago, and it dealt with exactly this about overtime in the police department, which, again, something that we've talked about incessantly here at this table, and I've always looked at it as it being a bad thing, because I just don't want police officers working 2 full careers. I mean, I don't think it's a good idea. I wouldn't want to do something 80 hours, 90 hours a week, and something as stressful as police work, it just seems crazy. But beyond that, we have the administrative side of it and the costs, and there's a lot of this, I want to call it double dipping. That's a bad phrase. That's not what it is. But this going to the trough twice, because you get the comp time and then you also get the overtime, and all the while the costs are clicking up because you're moving up in the ranks and all of that. So again, to use your phrase, how does one claw this back without appearing to be anti-police?
So with respect to police overtime, the issue there was controls. And sort of the integrity of the approval system. And what we found there were tens of millions of dollars of either not properly approved by peers rather than supervisors, reciprocal approvals, and that's a pure administrative control issue, 1. 2, 99% of the overtime that we looked at over a 2.5-year period was missing justification or reason codes. So no one can look at exactly why. And when you see how much this actually costs us on an annual basis, in Chicago the estimate is be $170 million this year, approximately twice what was actually appropriated in the 2017 budget. It's real money, and it's not just about money though. It's about effective use of taxpayer resources, which, if we tightened up those controls, would probably mean that we have significant money sitting in our budget right now to pay for more officers to the extent that we need them, to pay for the reforms of the police department, which everyone is, sort of fearing right now. there's a lot of money that's sitting in our budget, which is why sort of programmatic examination of how it is that we administer something like overtime, which is a huge line item in our budget, really can make a big difference on what we're able to do in the name of the public interest.
You sat with the PATF, the Police Accountability Task Force. I know I saw you on that night at Sullivan High School when things got a little bit rowdy, and I'm just wondering how all of this fits in your own mind about what your takeaways are from your service on the PATF. What did you learn that helped you as Inspector General?
It brought me down to the ground. I'm a professional. Educated, white, upper middle class, to examine the connect up or the lack of connect up of government to where there are really pressing multi-generational complex social issues and how it connects up to policing. It wasn't that it was eye-opening. It wasn't that I hadn't seen it before. As a prosecutor, I'd worked with the police. I'd gotten members of the community who were afraid to cooperate, to put bad people away. There's good people on both sides, on all sides of these things. But right now, there is what the experience on the task force brought to me was a real, visceral, gnawing sense and understanding that people are frustrated. A lot of those that are frustrated have just plain given up on government, and that's not a good place to be, because what we're talking about are whole society problems that require whole government solutions. And so another aspect of the work on the task force was sort of a further appreciation of something that we see in the context of our work in the Inspector General's office is so many programs themselves are their own operational silos. And again, to those words, holistic and programmatic. What we're looking at with our challenges with policing right now and the relationship between the community and the police department is that we ask the police department to do too much to solve the problems in the community. The police can't do it alone, and yet we put them out there to do it alone, treating solely as law enforcement problems what really are broader social policy and economic issues. And so the complexity and the dimensions of this problem, that's what the task force sort of brought in a real visceral way that does not go away. Since the work on the task force, that is where sort of my perspective and my spirit and soul have lived.
Do you get to have these kind of conversations with Rahm Emanuel? Do you sit with him and just talk like this to him?
No. The way, so first off, if I were sitting and talking with the mayor all the time, people would say, you have too close a relationship with the mayor. Not a good thing. So there needs to be maintained some distance. And I will say that the mayor is incredibly respectful of that sort of need for institutional distance. That being said, we do periodically get together and talk. He tells me things that we've done that he disagrees with. He tells me things that we're not doing, that he thinks we should be looking at because there's real opportunities, and he quite doesn't understand what may be going on. And on the flip side, I'll tell him sort of thematically things that we're seeing where there are opportunities for him that actually require his intercession. Again, that siloed operation. It's the mayor that can say, hey, why aren't we connecting up horizontally here on this? Why aren't we looking at whole programs? So we have those conversations periodically, but we have to maintain our distance.
And what about Eddie Johnson? Do you get to talk to him at all? Or?
Yes.
Do you have these kinds of conversations with him?
To this point, we actually have had recently a conversation somewhat along these lines. We agree to disagree on a lot of things. Same thing with the mayor, agree to disagree. I do think the superintendent really appreciates that there is a need for outside eyes and independent analysis and assessment. But it's a complex relationship that will probably be more complex as we start to roll out the work of the Public Safety Inspector General.
I mean, in this age of Trump, the parallels are interesting. Can the mayor just call you up one day and say, well, thanks, Joe, thanks for this, you're out? Can he do that?
So this is another area where Chicago actually deserves some credit. There's a statutory term. It's protected. There's a statutory protection of the budget. There's a set budget floor that's a percentage of the overall city budget.
And did you get it?
The budget floor? Absolutely.
Okay,
It's required as a matter of law. These are things that actually have been implemented in recent years, some of them, to assure the independence and the integrity and the operation of the Inspector General's office. So there is an appreciation for this function. So no, you can't be put out on the street at a moment's notice.
A few weeks ago, after that tragic killing of the teacher that you knew very well up in Rogers Park, you wrote an op-ed in the Sun-Times that was it was raw and really heartfelt, and I think it sparked a lot of conversations in a lot of homes and in a lot of offices around town. And you were criticized for it in a lot of ways, but I thought it was I just thought it was dramatic and really an important thing that needed to be said. And you said, one of the things you said in there that I want to read back to you, said, let's admit what we all know. Our city does not have a comprehensive crime strategy. We desperately need one and a leader to make it a reality. What we don't need, spinning an innovative technology-enhanced tactical pilot project as a crime strategy, which it is not, referring, I guess, to the the kind of computer-based analyses that are going on. You want to say anything more about that?
There's obviously the police department, Superintendent Johnson disagreed with that assessment.
Yes, I know. He made that quite public.
The mayor disagreed with that assessment. I will tell you, a lot of members of the city council stopped and thought, and I think it was Alderman Moore that said, so before that article, if you were to ask each of my colleagues, each of my 50 colleagues what the crime strategy was, a fair number of them wouldn't have an answer for you, and those that had an answer would each give you a different answer. And we are now all talking about what the crime strategy is, which has to vary ward by ward, area by area. But what I was calling out is, in some significant part, is what is being done. The public doesn't know. There hasn't been a presentation of the comprehensive bundle of not merely law enforcement activities in bad neighborhoods, but the economic policies, the social programs, the things that are proactive and preventative that all go into a larger crime strategy. The support programs that are necessary not just for the young and for those at risk, but for those that are coming out of the criminal justice system to make sure that they don't go back and become recidivists. That whole picture has not been presented. And so until it is, we have to say it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist unless we know what it is.
Well, I want to quote you back just one more sentence, because you went on to say to the mayor, tell the superintendent what you expect of him, give him what he needs to do, and get the spinmeisters, speechwriters, and civilian consultants out of his hair. I thought that was a very interesting point. He doesn't, if he doesn't deliver or doesn't have a damn good reason connected to a good plan, no more tactical incrementalism, only a comprehensive strategy, then thank him for his service and show him the door. And you also pointed out, as we have all been pointing out for the last couple of years, that the clearance rate is 5% for people, as has been said many times at this table. You can walk down the street, pull out a gun, and shoot somebody, and as long as you don't kill them, you will probably not, there's a 95% chance you won't get arrested, you'll be free to walk on and shoot somebody else. That is the reality in Chicago today.
It is. And so the talk about spinmeisters, and you're right, it was raw. The intention was not to be dramatic, but the intention was to call some things as I was feeling them, and absolutely emotionally triggered by the senseless murder of somebody that I and my children had a personal connection to, and not the only person that I've known in that capacity. But we're talking right now a lot about the wins, and it is a win with respect to what we're doing in Inglewood right now, okay? But on the north side, in the Wilson Station area, in Uptown. There's a whole set of other problems.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about citywide? We're not talking about it citywide. We're talking about it sort of in compartmentalized ways against a backdrop where we have these much larger sort of social and economic issues with populations that have been neglected over many years. Let's open up the conversation. And yeah, there was a can of whoop-ass opened on me in my budget hearing in the City Council, but after the initial sort of clubbing, if you will, we spent 3 hours having a real conversation about all of this stuff. And that's the space that we all need to be in. So really, the only objective that I had in mind when I wrote that piece was to snap us all out of the internalization that we necessarily have to do at some level to just get up and go to work and move through these situations in these environments. And once we internalize it, you know, it's not our problem. Every once in a while, we have to talk in ways that recognizes we're all in this together, and that was my objective.
Yeah. A pet peeve of mine, and it might have something to do with the couple of years that I spent working in the press office, of all things, is this insane idea of putting out press releases every time the crime rate dips by 0.03%.
Yeah.
It's like, well, why don't you get back to me when it goes down 20% or when you have something really substantive to report to me? Because what you're doing is you're undercutting your own credibility. You're making it clear that you really don't have any idea what to do. And the numbers, hey, the numbers kind of went down. Let's have a party, you know? I've never understood that.
Well, the most important press cycle for a leader is not the next one. It's the last one. And that's really what your comment goes to. Where we want to be is for all of us to be governing and administering programs as if this is our last go-round, as if we don't care what the next press cycle is. There's going to be ups and downs, and you're right. You tout the small good result that you get over a short period of time. You're almost begging to be hit hard for the short cycle downswing that occurs.
Yeah.
And we're talking about something much bigger.
Yeah, much more important, much more significant. Well, you know, it's weird. We've been at this for an hour, and I don't think we've even scratched the surface. There's so much more. See my list of questions I didn't get to? Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. I really enjoyed talking with you. I have a great deal of respect for you and what you do, and I'm very happy that you were able to carve an hour out to come over here and talk to us. Thank you.
No, thank you. And the folks in my office will appreciate your appreciation of their work.
I'm sure they will. Joe Ferguson is the Inspector General of the City of Chicago, and we're really happy to have had him on the program here today, and we hope he'll come back again sometime. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a production of Can TV, and we're very glad to be here. We'll be back next week with another show, and let's see, when are we? Well, we have Richard Boykin coming. I think it might be next week or maybe the week after, the guy who caused all that dissension on the pop tax. So anyway, watch the show. And don't forget, you can see any number of our shows, all of them, in fact, by going to this address right here, and you can see them anytime you want. Spend your Christmas week watching old Chicago newsrooms. I'm Ken Davis. Thank you very much. See you next week. Bye-bye.